We are good. We are good. We are good. We hope you are well.
I'm all right. All right. How's Mr. Ragoba? Did you get enough attempt to lift the tempo and to speak positive things into existence? In the minister's speech.
That sounds like a loaded question, Mariano.
It is quite loaded, I'm sure.
Well, I know the last time you were criticizing me and telling me that, well, not criticizing me, but suggesting to me that we need to speak positive things to help uplift the tempo and the sense of belief.
Not that we should speak. I was asking about consumer confidence and how all of that factors.
That's right, yes. Did you get enough in the speech to suggest that consumers should be confident? That's just a question.
Yeah.
Mr. Browne, good morning. First of all, let's get your, but you've already started to give us your opinion, but your initial response, your overriding response to Minister Imber's 5-hour and 11-minute presentation on Monday.
Well, Mr. Imber said there's a year again to go, and I can't achieve too much, so I'm not going to do anything. And that's reflected in terms of the fiscal statement. This is the budget. We were able to maintain revenue position, and we're going to have a deficit. Things are a lot better. It could have been a lot worse. I mean, I guess that should have been the headline in the budget. It could have been a lot worse. These are the things that we've been able to do over the last 10 years. The reality is that when Mr. Imber came into office, he identified a number of issues. You will recall that there were issues with regard to data, right, and the projected number in terms of gas and everything else. There was an issue with regard to CSO. There was the concern with regard to energy prices. Well, 10 years later, we're in the same position. Nothing has changed where that is concerned, except to say that I've been able to keep things together and hold it on. So let's just say that Mr. Imber has a very, very difficult job. The government is in a very difficult position. But if we had to look on the basis of outcomes, and we had to suggest and to say that we are talking about change, we'll have to say that nothing has changed. Well, certainly not for the positive. We've been able to stay in the same position. And the argument is if you stay in position a little longer, right, until 2027, everything is going to come back together again. So just what is the record? Well, the highest level of production was in 2011, 2010, somewhere thereabouts, 4.2 billion cubic feet. And since then, we've been on a downward spiral. We've gone down from 4.2 billion, we went down to 3.6, and that was considered bad. And then we went down even further to 3.3. And then Angelin came into position, and then Angelin and Jupiter came in, and we reversed the trend, and we went back up to 3.6, then 3.5, and we really haven't done any better since then. In fact, quite the opposite. It has kept going down. Now that angle of elevation hasn't changed. So the graph in terms of absolute production is declining. And when we talk about manufacturing, and the minister speaks of manufacturing, he even admitted when he was talking about manufacturing that a substantial portion of manufacturing is dependent on the energy sector, particularly since 2017, and we've included petrochemicals as part of that number. Prices are still depressed. So what is the future? Crime is high. The reserves.
Minister Imber, and I want your opinion, Minister Imber also sought to telegraph to the population that there had been 3 years up to the time the budget was ready of growth, I think 1.6 or 5% in 2022, 1.3 in 2023, and at time of the reading the budget 1.9 in 2024. Former Minister of Energy Kevin Ramrine told us yesterday that there was a subscript in the budget which pointed to the source of those numbers as the Ministry of Finance. What are your sources telling you regarding those growth numbers provided by the minister?
Well, the minister, as I said before, is in a difficult position. So if he hasn't gotten the numbers or hasn't gotten the numbers prepared in the fashion in which it should come normally, and that is an independent third party, well, he has stepped into the breach. So these are my numbers, right? So we could complain. So I go back. The complaint 10 years ago was that CSO was in a shambles and we're going to fix that. 10 years later, we haven't. And And this is a time when we actually need the numbers. Why? Because how we share the pie is going to be very important. We've been talking about the underclass. We've been talking about those who are below the poverty line. So the question is, how many people are below the poverty line? What is the poverty line? When was the last time a budgetary survey was done? That was done in 2011. We're in 2024, going into 2025. It's 14 years late. We are talking about a difficult period. We're talking about changes, as your minister put it, in the Gini coefficient, in terms of the fact that dispersion of income is skewed. Well, how do you correct for that? And what is the base? What are the numbers that you're going to use? And the answer, it doesn't have them. I mean, this is not an example of achievement. This is not an example of talking about positive over consumer confidence. This is actually something to be angry about. It has taken, I mean, if you were going to do something, and these were priorities, and these are things that you had to address, after 9 years, you ought to have done so. Right? So to tell us that you have to, okay, these are the numbers and we have positive growth and so on. But in real terms, we are operating in 2008, 2009 income, even allowing for positive growth. That's the reality.
But isn't that hard for the Ministry of Planning to do a national survey after 14 years to check, to identify the data that must be used to craft effective and timely and contemporary government policy? Is a national survey on poverty and other indices that difficult to execute?
Well, as I understand it, they said that the numbers will come out in January or sometime early next year, right? Which is a little too late for the budget, I would think. And this is not a surprise. We knew this is where we were going to be. And we knew this is where we were going to be over a considerable period. So I can't say that that gives me great courage, right? The point I would make is not what happened in between last year and this year. It's just what has happened over the 9 years. Right? That's how we have to measure achievement. We have to measure them on the basis of outcomes. And the same way that the minister paints this wonderful picture of digitalization and everything else is going to happen. Well, not that we have a disaster at Cross, which is the Ministry of Legal Affairs and the registry system, but it really has been pulling teeth to get that operating, and there are still a number of kinks in terms of how it operates. We have a very simple thing: let people pay online. That's not surprising. We even talk about getting to accept forms online. Just allow them to pay online, right? And you want to tell me about a glowing future, what you're going to do in terms of digitalization and in terms of what you call it, a cashless society and that kind of nonsense. I mean, it proceeds in a series of steps with a certain level of graduation. For me to have a sense of belief, I have to set a target, and people have to be able to meet the target within a reasonable time frame. And if you don't meet it, you should give an explanation of why not. Right? So what we do instead, and this is the minister's position, well, I didn't meet it, but look at the other things that we're going to achieve, down the road. Look down the road, see what's going to happen. Right.
Well, Mariano, I know it's a $5 billion approximately deficit budget, and he suggested that the state is going to finance that $5 billion in part by divestment of certain state assets. He talked about Magdalena, he talked about Clico. He didn't reference TSTT or anything like that, even though there's speculation, or there has been speculation in the media concerning that. What's your take in terms of that $5 billion deficit and how he's proposing to tackle it?
Well, let's look at the saleable assets, right? So FCB is eminently saleable to the domestic public. So that will help solve it. Clico is saleable. I think the argument is going to be at what price. There's going to be a legal imbroglio over that. I don't think that's just going to be, we're going to up and sell it, because he's not selling all. He's selling 49%. He can sell what he could sell. Now, if you are a buyer and you're taking over a company, it's not in distress. Actually, Clico's assets are quite interesting and quite possible and quite positive, right? But you don't have control. What does a company want when they're buying a company? They want to have to control. If you're only selling 49%, I do not have control. So that's a funny legal position. So I'm gonna park Clico aside as in terms of a saleable asset, which is probably the asset which should generate the most cash. All right. After that, we're talking about hundreds of millions rather than billions in terms of reducing the debt. So I don't, you know, that, and this is a quick election. This is an election here, right? Getting all of those things in position at the same time has certain hurdles in terms of meeting it. Are you going to sell for distress asset? Petrotrin. All right. Well, this is year number 7. All right. At this stage of the game, the price at this stage would probably be substantially discounted because we didn't do a deep mothballing operation, and we probably would have had assets which have atrophied over time. All right. So that reduces the value of any asset. So I'm sure he said that he's going to sell assets. I am not too clear in terms of how much money he's going to generate on the basis of those sales.
So the rest of it will be via borrowing, you think?
I'm sure the majority of it is going to be via borrowing. Well, in my opinion, sorry, let me take that back. I think that the majority of it is going to be via borrowing. I think that there probably have been somewhere down the road with regard to conversations with regard to sale of assets. There ought to have been. The procurement issues, I would presume, would have been worked out. They would have had some conversations with the procurement authority in terms of getting some priority and then probably getting a little looser conditions in terms of getting it through. But there are hurdles. It's not simple. It's not very straight. It's not straightforward.
Do you think the state should consider divesting itself of TSTT and the 51% holding they have been?
I don't know what that is going to do, because who is going to be the interested party? I can say to you that there was a possibility in my time in office of merging Flow and TSTT. The difficulty remains that Flow is a much more successful company and TSTT is not. Right? It has much more investable assets. Flow does not need TSTT. It could kill it. Right? So the question is, who's buying TST and what exactly are they buying? From a market share position, it's not strong. So anybody who is buying it has now to come and upgrade the assets. So the reality at this stage is going to be that you're going to be selling for not undervalue. You're going to be selling for more realistic value, which is, I think, is going to be less than what they expect.
But in terms of TSTT, isn't one of their main saleable attributes the fact that they have what they've described as a strong infrastructural base, which many of the other networks work off of in the country?
All right. So since we're talking about a strong infrastructure base, what is that? Because fixed line doesn't...
they have the hardware on the ground.
They have the hardware on the ground. In a world of digital transformation, when we talk...
Even in a world of digital transformation, and you know this, it still comes down to the signal just float in the edges, so it still has to come at some point to hardware.
And it comes to a cable. They have any?
But that's the question.
Do they have a cable? They have an international cable network that they're relying on? And the answer to that will have to be no.
What do you think about the issue related to where he's pegged the gas and oil price? I mean, former minister, I'm not yesterday, said he thinks that is it $77 or $78 oil and $3, whatever it is, per MMBTU for gas.
What? Sorry?
Do you think the gas and oil price he's pegged those prices?
What did Kevin say? That it was positive? That was a good number?
He said it was reasonable.
Yeah.
He said the oil was reasonable. I don't know, but did he say the gas was reasonable?
He said they were both reasonable.
Well, if you accept that and you accept the prices, nobody knows what the price is going to be. I mean, the numbers I saw suggested that oil and gas prices are likely to be weak before they get strong. So that's going to be a period of at least a year. And that depends on the climatic conditions and what the conditions are going to be this December. If, for example, it's cold, then the price will spike. So we'll be in a good position. So the answer is that we really don't know. It's dependent on climatic conditions. Right? Volumetrically, in terms of the volume that we're producing, not so hot. All right, that's the critical issue because we do have...
No matter what the price is the gain is going to be limited because we have production level issues.
Correct, yes. So, I mean, you know, what you have to do is to have, and this is the point, the minister praises himself for the prudent management of the economy and everything that has happened. And we showed positive rates of growth over the last 2 years, 3 years, right? Well, all right. thank the Ukraine and thank the what you call the spike as a result in COVID, which pushed up prices. So what we're dealing here is price effect, not volume, not increased production. It's just simply a matter of price over which he has no control. So it was fortuitous, and we got a fortuitous budget surplus, right? So he crows and says that we're the only budget surplus in X period of time. Well, he didn't do anything to create that, right? The Ukraine war and COVID helped him where that was concerned, right? So you have to come down to what do I control and what have I changed? What is it in my competence to change? Right? And when we get to that particular point, there's nothing that we could point to that makes us very comfortable or very happy.
One of the main points of focus of many of the post-budget discussions through the chambers and the TTMA is the ongoing issue of the levels of crime in the country. Just as a gauge, what will be the net impact on the economy in a general sense if the state of Trinidad and Tobago were to get a handle on the crime, and where would we see significant gains in the medium to short term if we got that accomplished?
Well, it's not only getting a handle on crime. What you have to do is get a handle on crime, and it has to be positive over a period of time. The fact that you have a dip in crime doesn't make change.
I'm talking, when I say get a handle, I mean in a sustained fashion.
All right, in a sustainable fashion. Well, yes, it should help. That would speak to the positive, the confidence matters that Richard spoke about or asked about on the last time we had this conversation. But until you do that, there's going to be a heavy level of skepticism. That's going to affect any index, any confidence index. And since Richard spoke about it, I will assure him that I will work with the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce, and we'll build an index and we'll measure it from now on.
The issue, I'm sorry, sorry to interrupt you, Paul. The issue of, he talked about Atlantic LNG and probably phrasing this inelegantly, but the reclassification of how taxation is done, which is what I understand. And he's saying that from October 1st, we are going to get billions, I think he said. I think, I don't want to paraphrase him incorrectly, but I think he said something like you'll be getting billions in additional income because of how we restructure the arrangements with the companies in Atlantic Energy. Is he valid in what he said with regard to that, in your opinion?
The proof of the pudding is in the eating. All right. I don't know that we've been in such a robust position or strong position in terms of negotiating. But if they were able to, I know that they've restructured Atlantic LNG, and in the process has moved their share upwards of the total of the new schema. They've made they put all of the trains into one company and have gotten a bigger percentage. Well, that's very generous, I thought. I was very glad for that. And I think the country should be too. Now, as to what were the trade-offs, we don't know. We're not on the inside of that room. And I could understand the minister making many positives in that regard. But I'm sure that the energy sector companies would have negotiated very hard. Right? They would not have given it up. So I will wait to see what the results are. I wasn't on the inside. I don't know what is taking place, but I'm happy to hear that there's a renegotiation. I'm happy to hear that they have 10% as distinct from 10% of the overall train, because they had no position. We made a very bad strategic error in 2000 when we allowed trains 2 and 3 to go forward without taking any interest in them. So, and we only had an interest in 4. And as you know, 1 is stranded. Train 1 is stranded after a substantial, I can't remember how much money we spent on it, but it's stranded. So if we were able to parlay that position into a better percentage of the overall the other 2 trains, that's positive. Right? And I would say congratulations for them to doing that, but I would like to see what the results are. I don't know what the trade-offs are. And as I said, the energy companies negotiate very hard. They're in the business of making money, not being very generous to Trinidad and Tobago. He also said that they had changed the basis of pricing, right? And he was talking about new laws coming into position. And to Tony Paul, who is a former energy staffer at the Ministry of Energy, as well as having worked in the multinational corporations and has worked on his own, has written several articles indicating that we have never fully implemented the reference price system, which is contained in the Petroleum Taxes Act. And as a result, we're missing out on billions of dollars. So it didn't require any change in the law. It required the execution of existing law, right? So when Minister Inwood has been standing up since 2018, and I forget what it was in terms of the energy, I can't remember, the 2018 seminar at Hyatt, and they put certain things on the table. Well, that's 7 years ago, right? So, I mean, we have conveniently reached a point where we've done all the negotiations after 7 years, and just before an election, we're going to get lots of money. So you'll forgive me if I'm a little skeptical. I have to see it.
What do you think is, if anything, is going to be the impact of the raise in minimum wage for public sector workers and the announcement of moving from 4 to 5%? Many are suggesting it's, of course, it's an election year, so you want to present some in parentheses good news.
Well, that's pretty straightforward. You have 100,000 people working in the public service, and the PSA accounts for PSA and NUGE account for about 80% of them. So the answer, if I could isolate the leadership of NUGE and basically put something on the table, could kind of force them to come to a settlement, where I'm likely to have people who are more disposed to voting for me. So you could say that's a tactical move on his part, right? The reality, of course, is who's going to pay for it, right? And when. Now, that's the issue, right? So we could make any kind of announcement at this stage. When the PNM came into office, remember, they castigated the UNC for making agreements with regard to payment structures, which they then had to find the money for in depressed times, right? So the presumption when you're making announcements with regard to increased pay, right? The presumption is that you have the money to pay for it, right? And remember, this is for a negotiating period which ends in 2022. In other words, it's for the past. What we're talking here is about, we're talking about back pay. We're not talking about future pay. We still have 23, 24, and 25 to go. All right. So it sounds good, right? And let's not what you go. Let's not get past that, right? It's positive. It's a positive statement of intent, right? But most union negotiations should really be done before the fact, right? Not after the fact.
In a practical sense, a lot of the pre-budget discussions from the Energy Chamber and other chambers were focused on the fact that Trinidad and Tobago is, as we say, we are champagne taste and Moby pocket at this stage in our country's history. And there were a lot of suggestions before the budget that, well, some of the subsidies were going to be removed. There was going to be a tightening of the belt based on the Prime Minister's statement about we will see the light in 2027. But none of those bits of advice made their way into the budget in terms of managing the. Yeah.
Let's be realistic. This is an election year.
Yeah, I'm not saying no, and that's why I asked the question.
This is an election year. Any concept of tightening, I mean, let's just look at it. The expenditure profile under the UNC. The UNC came into office when the budget was about a number was about $40 billion, right? At the end of the UNC's term in office, we had reached 60. In other words, it had multiplied by a factor of what? That's a substantial number, 50%, right? And the biggest increase was in subsidies and transfers, which went to more or less 50% of expenditure. Total expenditure is 59 billion. All right, and the next go round, when PNM comes into office, expenditure is cut to 50 billion, so it's down 9 billion. And we limp along 50-50, and then till, of course, we've now split it into 59-59 again. So that's why I said, let's look at the real position, right? When he talks about increase in incomes and the economy grew by next year, we're growing back to to meet 2011 income levels in real terms, right? So in reality, the country is poorer. That's the reality. And that's one of the reasons why you get pushback. He didn't say he was going to increase utility prices. He said that utility prices they will have to go up at some time, right? He said that very quietly in the course of the budget speech. Nobody focused on that, and the answer is that they have to go up. He's not saying that it's not going to take place, right? He's just saying that he's pushing it back, right? I have an election to consider, and let's look at electoral arithmetic, right? We're dealing with 2290 now. 2 of those seats are in Tobago. We're not clear what's going to happen in Tobago, how that's going to come back. If the PNM doesn't win those 2 seats or lose one of those 2 seats, they're down to what? 22, we're down to 21, right? Let's presume that UNC starts off with a 19, right? And that they will keep it. Which seats are the UNC going to lose? All right, now we have some swing seats. All right, Moruga is one, which has been PNM, which has been UNC, which has been PNM, which has been UNC. So it's a swing seat. Either side could win that. So we're going to see what's going to happen. But we also have St. Joseph, which has never really been since since 1976. It's never been a safe PNM seat. It could swing.
But they won it in 2 consecutive elections.
Well, yes, they won it in 2 consecutive elections, right? So in this go round, but not before. And I'm not certain in terms of where we at, what stage of elections are we at. This represents 2015 to 2025 represents a break in the tradition between 1986 and 2000 and 2010, where we've been alternating between UNC PNM, right? Not so we've had a break, we had a change. Well, will it continue? Right? Now that's a guess at this stage of the game. We don't know. So this is a tight period. And that's one of the reasons why Mr. Imber didn't introduce any there are no new taxes. There were none last year either. Right? Well, there were some marginal increases. But then there was the introduction.
Well, again, strategically, he also didn't increase the minimum wage for private sector entities.
And he doesn't have to. The mere fact that he increased it for the public sector automatically means it's going to be followed. That's it. So he didn't have to make that announcement. He doesn't say that he didn't do it. And Mr. Imbut understands that game very well. Right? He just did it for the public. If the rest of the country does that, it's not my fault. I didn't do it. Right? But that's exactly what's going to happen. You think that because they could do it in the public sector, it's not going to happen in the private sector? Of course, the unions are going to go for it.
It's a knock-on effect. Mr. Ramnaran yesterday also shared the view that he thought the manufacturing sector, the non-oil manufacturing sector, was headed in the right direction. What's your perspective on that?
Well, any positivity in the non-energy sector is great. Now, and I haven't been able to examine the numbers. I haven't gone through, I didn't get a review of the economy quickly enough for me to be able to go through the numbers. But I was a little suspicious when we're talking about repairs as being a driver of economic growth and transport, right? Transport is a function of domestic activity, right? And if domestic activity increased over a period of time, transportation expenses and transportation percentage budget will do so. What repairs? Trinidad is the center for repairing what? International. You could tell me?
I don't know. I never heard we repairing anything. We have some little yacht things down in Chagram.
Yeah. You heard about the shipyard in the south?
Some little yacht things.
Well, that doesn't. I mean, so I mean, as from a low base, probably you can have some level of increase. As a driver of the economy, the answer to that is no. Right. So I am a little skeptical on some of those numbers. And again, because we haven't had a full expose with regard to what those numbers really contain. So I mean, there were some huge numbers he talked about in terms of change, but overall, in terms of the non-energy sector, the non-oil sector, the non-energy sector, did achieve overall growth of approximately 2%, which is a positive thing. There are areas which are doing well, but not sufficient to offset the dynamic caused by the decline in the energy sector. Right? The energy sector is not a small portion and is not sufficient to be able to generate foreign exchange necessary. And you can't force people to pay in US dollars. You can't force the energy sector to be, you have had gentlemen's agreements. right? But to say that you're going to legislate it and you're going to make people pay in US dollars, well, there are two things. The law, as Richard will remind me, does not encourage you. It tells you what you have to do. So I can't see how we could say that we're going to pass law and then at the same token talk about encourage. The two things don't fit in the same sentence. In addition to which, the Central Bank Act is clear, right? The currency of Trinidad and Tobago is TT dollars.
Mariano, thanks for being with us this morning. I appreciate your time as usual.
Well, thank you very much for asking those relevant and pertinent questions.
All right.
Somebody has to ask them.
Thank you so much, Mariano Browne, for being with us.